trade for? And who should you trade away? What's going on, fantasy football fans? It's Mitch here, back with another week of Buy Low, Sell High on OwnersBox Fantasy. Spike the like button. Don't forget to subscribe for weekly Buy Low, Sell High videos just like this. Let's get started with the Buy Low candidates entering week 6. These are players coming off weak performances, but I think you should capitalize on their current trade market. Let's begin with the player that I said you have to draft. He's a must draft entering the season, and he's disappointed so far. Bennie Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. Now, the weird thing about this one is that Bijan has been okay. He's been solid, right? But you expected greatness from this draft pick, potentially a league winner with this draft pick, and you haven't received it. At least that's what the owner is thinking in your league that has Bijan Robinson. But what if he's just taken a little bit longer to get going? The Falcons have played a really competitive schedule so far this season. They have trailed in multiple games, and right now it feels like the Falcons offense is just getting going. They're going to get the run game going as well down the stretch. And I think the time is now to capitalize on Bijan Robinson. So far this year, he has 1 touchdown. Do you really think Bijan Robinson is going to average 1 touchdown in every 5 games that he plays for the rest of the year? I think not. Okay? He doesn't even have 100 yards rushing in a single game so far. He is a must buy. There are not many running backs that are featured the way that Bijan is. Catching the football and running the football. The touches are there, but the fantasy points are limited. I expect much bigger days moving forward for Bijan Robinson. So look to trade for him if that fantasy owner is desperate in your league that has Bijan and he's at the bottom of the standings. He's 1-4. He's 2-3. Maybe he needs a change. Maybe he's 0-5. Get after him and say, hey, what for Bijan? I'm curious because I want Bijan Robinson for the rest of the season. A similar running back of the stature of Bijan Robinson that I think you can also attack is Bree Hall. And this one is much more catastrophic for the owner because Bree Hall was actually pretty good at the start of the year. He was averaging like great receiving numbers, a lot of targets. His rushing yardage was not terrible. Like it wasn't hurting your fantasy team. But the Bree Hall owner right now is probably sick to his stomach, and he's probably sick in the head from all of the mumbo jumbo going on in New York because Bree Hall, 10 attempts, 9 attempts against the Denver Broncos and the Minnesota Vikings. Quietly 2 of the best defenses in the NFL, by the way. You always want to look to trade for players after tough matchups where they've struggled, right? Bree Hall has struggled for a lot of different reasons. The Jets, they just fired their coach. The franchise is a little off, okay? But I will say that there's been probably some friction between Aaron Rodgers and Robert Saleh. But I would also say that they have been trailing against the Vikings, right? They were trailing in these games, but also Allen has become a thing in that backfield. Braylon Allen has become a thing, the rookie running back who I like a lot. He's a good player. But Bree Hall is going to see better days than he's seen. And he's probably going to have better games than these recent weeks. You look before these last 2 games, 16, 14, and 16 attempts to begin the season. And he had a minimum of 4 receptions a game during that first 3 weeks. So he was actually a pretty good fantasy pick to that point. Now, some people may argue it wasn't sustainable due to Allen getting a lot of work. But I think that Bree Hall maybe is in a situation where his fantasy owner is sick of him because he doesn't know what to think. He just wants to get rid of him and get him off his team because of the competition that he didn't foresee and because the Jets have a large narrative of being just a horrible franchise right now and everyone's giving up on the Jets and everybody's fading the Jets. What if the Jets upset the Bills? What if Bree Hall scores 2 touchdowns in that game against a susceptible run defense? What if that happens? all of a sudden Bree Hall goes to the back right at the top of those charts, right? Right at the top of those running back rankings. So I think the time to trade for Bree Hall is right now. Right now. Just as Bijan Robinson, the time to trade for these studs that were expected to be top 5, top 6 assets in fantasy that have not performed that way. The time to get them is now if you want them. So Bijan Robinson, Bree Hall, 2 trade candidates to buy. Another running back that I also love to buy this week is Kenneth Walker. He's playing on Thursday Night Football. I would potentially wait for after the Niners game to see how it goes. He could have a great game, but dependent on game script, if the Niners jump ahead, it might be a tough game once again for Walker. But so far, we haven't seen a huge sample size from Walker this year because the team, he's been injured. Zach Charbonnet was in. They took it slow with Walker. And he's had 2 pretty darn good games for fantasy purposes, but he's coming off of his worst performance, arguably against the easiest opponent, the New York Giants, right? Like, he had 7 catches for 57 yards in that game, but he did basically nothing rushing the football. The crazy thing about Walker, though, the positive, is the amount of receptions he already has this year. Like, he has 13 receptions already in just 3 games. He had 29 all of last season. I think that is actually something that they've allowed him to grow into. This is not a fluke. I think that he will see over 40 catches this year in this backfield, and he is an explosive runner. He ran all over the Detroit Lions. He had 183 yards on the Lions and the Broncos, 2 top 10 rush defenses in football, along with 4 touchdowns. So Walker is explosive. Walker is a guy that maybe it's not even a buy low, it's just a buy. Like, you need to get this guy on your team. If you want an elite running back, I think Walker is that guy with the ability running the football, with the upside receiving wise that might be flying under the radar. And I would just buy Kenneth Walker anywhere I could because I think he's legit for the rest of the season as an RB1 as long as he stays healthy. Now, he could disappoint against the Niners, and that would be the perfect time to buy Kenneth Walker because then he has 2 bad games in a row after 2 good games to start the season. Owners might be worried about the offensive line or the infrastructure of the offense. Maybe wait it out, but if he does have a good game against the Niners, you might have missed your window. So, just saying, Kenneth Walker, keep an eye out for him the next couple of weeks. See if you can toss a trade proposal out there to his owner. The final buy low candidate at running back is J.K. Dobbins of the Los Angeles Chargers, coming fresh off a bye week. Dobbins might have been forgotten about, and he might be in a loaded backfield on a fantasy roster. So check your league. Check where J.K. Dobbins is at. Is he behind a lot of other stud running backs? Because he was a late round pick, don't forget. He might have even been a waiver wire claim. So potentially he was on a 0 RB team, but most likely he was on a team that already had 2 good running backs. So check and see if that owner has the flexibility to maybe upgrade at quarterback, upgrade at wide receiver, upgrade at tight end, try to help him out at other positions, and try to snag J.K. Dobbins for the rest of the season. He's coming off 2 really tough matchups with the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Kansas City Chiefs. He's clearly the lead back for the Chargers, a pretty solid football team, and he didn't produce well in those games despite 17 and 18 touches in those tough matchups. So that owner might be looking at it as, Dobbins my 3rd best running back. He's my 4th best running back. Well, he might be your 2nd best option for the rest of the year. So it's definitely worth targeting that type of guy and bringing him in onto your team because he's going to have better weeks than facing the Chiefs and the Steelers. Gus Edwards is also injured, so there's not a lot of competition currently with the Chargers. I think Dobbins could be a low-key sleeper addition in a trade. Maybe even involve him in some sort of package or something to really upgrade your team at multiple positions, and you try to combine multiple players in this video. But J.K. Dobbins is somebody that maybe you even trade a running back that I would like to sell and try to get back Dobbins and an upgrade at another position. He feels like a guy that could be flexible, and I'm not really sure where his value will lie depending on which roster he's on, what league he's in. Like, owners might view him differently. So he's definitely somebody to check in on for the rest of the year. My final buy for week 6, our only wide receiver is Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill is a buy because at any point he could get his quarterback back. And with Tua, Tyreek Hill is a top 3 to 4 wide receiver in all of football and in fantasy football. Currently, he's struggling through Snoop Huntley and the backup quarterback play of the Miami Dolphins, but he low-key had a decent day against the Patriots, 6 catches for 69 yards, and the Patriots defense is not bad, specifically Christian Gonzalez, who's an absolute stud, and he actually held Tyreek Hill even in the year with Tua last year, even in his historic season. He held Tyreek to like one of, if not his worst game of the year last year. So there's evidence that regardless of quarterback, Tyreek probably would have struggled in this matchup. So I would look to add Tyreek and take a swing. If I'm somebody that has a really good record already, maybe I'm willing to sell a player that's playing better right now, but maybe doesn't have the long-term prospects of Tyreek Hill because I want to load my team up near the end of the year. And if Tua does come back near the end of the year, then that could mean I get a wide receiver 1 in Tyreek Hill, and maybe I ship off a lower end wide receiver 1 or a lower kind of maybe a high wide receiver 2 type of range, but I'm trying to upgrade my team for down the road because I'm 4-1 right now. Maybe I can afford a loss or 2. It doesn't really matter. I'm still going to be in the playoff mix. I'm still going to be in the top 6 or top 8 or top 4 maybe. So I'm going to take this chance on Tyreek, and it feels like at any point if Tua comes back, which he probably will, especially considering the Dolphins right now, they're 2-3, and they're not that far back from the Bills in the division. They're not that far back from the Jets, right? So they're right in the mix. So if they can get Tua back, they're definitely going to make some noise. So Tyreek Hill, not playing his best ball right now, but that's mostly due to situation. I'd be looking to add him anywhere I could. I don't want to break my team. I don't want to try to do something that's crazy, but I would definitely be willing to swap the now for the later when it comes to Tyreek Hill. Now the players you should sell, beginning with Garrett Wilson, wide receiver of the Jets, a player that I would actually sell for Tyreek Hill right now if I could. Garrett Wilson had 13 catches on 22 targets, 101 yards. But the key number here, guys, is 7.8 yards per reception. That is an ugly, disgusting number. And that is just not going to be replicated. It's just not going to happen again. 22 targets? Are you kidding me? Right? Like, that was because they were coming back. That was because they were trailing against the Vikings. And Aaron Rodgers had to get the ball out of his hand. Now, what if the Jets trade for Davante Adams? Because that could very well happen. If you want to trade Garrett Wilson, I'd do it right now because that was by far the best game of his season, by far the most targets of his season, and will be for the rest of the season. 7.8 yards per catch. I mean, he's not really getting down the field. There's no explosives here with this guy and Aaron Rodgers. The connection is just very much underneath the defense, and it's not down the field. It's not really in the red zone. It's very confusing. I mean, the other best game of his season was 6 catches for 60 yards. So before the potential Davante Adams addition, before he drops off once again against his next opponent, you know, Buffalo has a good secondary with good corners. I wouldn't be surprised if they held Garrett Wilson in check and Bree Hall was the one to go off. I would sell Garrett Wilson like right now. And like I said, I think I would swap him 1-for-1 for Tyreek Hill for the potential upside for the rest of the year. I think Garrett Wilson is going to be frustrating for a majority of the rest of the season. I'm not saying he's going to be bad. He's going to have probably a pretty high reception floor, but I just feel like his explosiveness, his touchdown upside, and it feels like his yardage upside is not even going to be that high. So Garrett Wilson is somebody that I want to get off my team if I can. Tank Dell is kind of the controversial sell of the week, in my opinion, for me. 5 catches, 62 yards, 4 catches, 38 yards the last 2 weeks. Those were by far his best numbers this season. Now, he's only played like 4 games, but Tank Dell is now going to be expected to have a bigger role. He's going to have more production because, of course, Nico Collins is out for 4 weeks with a hamstring. What if Tank Dell does increase his workload, does increase his usage, but doesn't really move the dial in terms of his production? What if Tank Dell is really struggling off of the broken leg that he suffered last year? What if Tank Dell is not quite the same player he was as a rookie because he's not physically the same player? Maybe he is just limited. Maybe Stephon Diggs will be the more targeted player. Maybe Stephon Diggs becomes the wide receiver 1 here. And perhaps you're only really getting Tank Dell at the absolute upside of his play, even if he does increase and have 100-yard games 2 out of the 4 games. What if it's only for this small sample size? Because Nico Collins is going to come back and resume wide receiver 1 usage, wide receiver 1 upside. So Tank Dell just feels very fragile. He's rather not going to see that uptick that everybody's trying to buy into, which you could easily sell right now in your fantasy league, or it's going to be very short-lived. And it's going to be frustrating after Nico Collins comes back. So the time to sell him, you've been frustrated with his production so far this year, is right now. The time to get off of him is the time that he is going to go off or potentially go off the most, right? So that's what I would do, is I would sacrifice the short term here of Tank Dell potentially having a lot of upside for 4 weeks and try to get somebody that is more consistent week to week. Somebody like Chris Godwin, for example, could be out there. Maybe you have to throw a little bit extra into the trade, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like, get off of the guy that has all this hype right now for something a little bit more trustworthy week to week in my lineup. Darnell Mooney is sort of similar, although I think Darnell Mooney has more consistency to his game for the rest of the season, given that he's the clear number 2 target in Kirk Cousins' Atlanta Falcons attack underneath Drake London. But the facts of the matter are, how many times are you going to have 16 targets for 9 receptions, 105 yards, and 2 touchdowns? That's just not going to happen. So Darnell Mooney is probably at his peak. He's probably going to have solid games for 70, 80, maybe 100 yards at times, but I don't think he's going to have many 2-touchdown games. I don't think he's going to have many 16-target games. He's just not really that type of player. He's more of a downfield target, an explosive option. I like him a lot. I think that he brings speed to the offense. But honestly, if you were going to ever sell Darnell Mooney at the peak of his powers, at the height of his game, the time is now. Like, people are going to want to target him, and they're going to value him a little bit more just because of what they saw on primetime on Thursday Night Football. Especially if you're in a casual league, they're going to want Darnell Mooney because that was one of the best games I've ever seen him play. It's probably not going to be replicated too often for the rest of the year. I mean, look, he had 8 targets as his season high. Before that, that was double on Thursday night with 16. And then his season high previously to 105 yards was only 88 yards in a separate game that he didn't have that 8 targets. So that was also in a comeback, by the way. So 2 games, his most yards in the 2 games were both in comebacks against the Bucs and against the Eagles. So unless he's going to be playing in a comeback every game and a shootout every game, he's not going to be putting up 80 to 100 yards every game. He's probably going to be pretty inconsistent, a flex viable option, but not the way that he's valued currently. Mark Andrews is another sell, and the sell at tight end. Mark Andrews had probably the best game of his season against Cincinnati. Cincinnati can't cover a soul right now. They can't cover anybody. Their defense is awful, and they can't stop anyone. So the time to sell any player is after they play the Bengals right now. So Mark Andrews is definitely one of those guys. You know, his 2 best games are very similar. 4 catches for 55 yards and 4 catches for 51 yards. The other games combined, 3 games, he only has 2 catches for 14 yards in the 3 other games in which he didn't have 4 for 50. So, I mean, that upside of 4 for 50 is not worth it when you're getting a donut in the other games. So the Ravens tight ends, extremely fragile. The Ravens passing game, extremely fragile. I do like Zay Flowers the most out of all the receivers and all the options in the receiving game. I think he's a big play threat. I think he is the one that sees the most volume. But this is clearly an offense that spreads the wealth, and this is clearly a Derrick Henry-led offense. So because they were coming back in the game, Andrews got targeted, but I don't think that's going to happen too often when you're the Baltimore Ravens. They're going to be a run-heavy team, and they don't really want to stress Mark Andrews with a ton of targets. He just doesn't feel like he's that good anymore. He's just physically not that good, but he's still living off of his name. So you can get value off of him right now. And the final sell for this video is DJ Moore, which hurts me because I own DJ Moore in one of my leagues, one of my top leagues, and he had a great game against Carolina. It was a revenge game, and it was by far Caleb Williams' best game of the season. 5 receptions, 105 yards, 2 touchdowns against Carolina for DJ Moore, and 2 long touchdowns, which was very promising. But I would argue for DJ Moore that he's played an extremely easy schedule. Like, they played the Rams, terrible secondary, terrible defense. They played the Colts, terrible secondary, terrible defense. They actually play another terrible secondary and terrible defense against Jacksonville. So perhaps wait until after the Jacksonville game where DJ Moore once again goes off and then sell him, because then you'll have 2 games where he's gone off and you might want to keep him at that point. But understand that I think that this is more about the matchup, because yes, DJ Moore is a great player, but Shane Waldron is not a great offensive coordinator and Caleb Williams is a rookie quarterback, and this offensive line is not very good. So I think the Bears offense is very matchup dependent, which means I don't really want him in games against good defenses, which scares me. I think that his volatility is high due to his situation. So DJ Moore is somebody that I would definitely look to trade based on the recent schedule he's had, the production he's had overall, which has just been okay and not fantastic, and try to capitalize off this recent success for Caleb Williams, because people are going to start to buy into Caleb Williams is going to be great for the rest of the year, but maybe it was just playing terrible defenses that did the trick. So those are my buys. Those are my sells for Week 6 of the 2024 fantasy season. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, Gronk spike the like button. Don't forget to subscribe for more. It's Mitch. Peace.